up to Oregon to gather your hops. Dig the beets from your ground, cut the grapes from your vine to set on your table your life sparkling wine.
Welcome everyone to our rainy day rally for support of Issue 1, the Reproductive Rights Amendment for Ohio that we'll be voting on in November. Welcome to those joining online or watching later online. Saturday morning is always an interesting time, especially when it's a rainy fall day. So hopefully folks are in the comfort of their homes enjoying this presentation through YouTube, because technology is wonderful when it works. I'm Pastor Brian Sachs. I'm the pastor of Bainbridge Community UCC. We are holding this in partnership with other great faith-based organizations, Faith Choice Ohio. Reverend Terry Williams is here from them. You'll be hearing from him. We have Federated Churches Social Justice Ministry, and also Catholics for Choice. Nicole is here for them, and she'll be speaking a little later as well. So thank you again for coming out. Just a couple housekeeping notes for those who are here in person. You heard earlier, but restrooms are right out there. Feel free to use them, as are water. Don't worry about getting up. Again, this is an important time to come together. Especially, we have our little cadre of counter-protesters out there. I'm sure we've all been hearing the wonderful things they've been saying about Issue 1, that it takes away parents' rights, that you got to protect children, that it has something to do with transgender rights, even though it's nowhere on there. But that, I think, just shows how desperate the opposition is, how much they know that being opposed to these things is unpopular. Being opposed to reproductive justice, abortion, contraception, all the things that the Reproductive Rights Amendment protects, is unpopular with Ohioans, the majority of Ohioans. So the only ammunition they have are lies. And the Bible has some interesting things to say about people who lie. Beware false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. How much suffering has to happen so certain folks can prove what good people they are? I haven't read the Bible verse that justifies that. I think we have a God who speaks of justice and compassion in all things, as Scripture speaks of, as the gospel speaks of, and it is important for people of faith, Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody, and people of no faith to stand up for the values of compassion and justice. So speaking of that, I'm going to invite Reverend Williams up now from Faith Choice Ohio to give kind of a rundown of the amendment, talk about where things are and polling and whatnot.
Thank you, Reverend Brian. As we gather in this space, I want you this morning, if you can, to humor me. I'd like you to repeat after me. Abortion bans are against my religion. Abortion bans are against our religion. Those of us who are people of religious faith who stand up and say, no, our religion says that prohibiting abortion, restricting people's ability to have decision-making authority over their own body is not moral. It is not just. It is not in our religious tradition. And we are standing up with people across all faiths, across all ethical backgrounds in this state to say what we know is the popular opinion and is the right opinion for this moment. That we do not need to have additional restrictions again and again and again placed on the bodies of Ohioans. Many of you know, last year we had the disastrous Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court, a nationwide decision that did away with nearly 50 years of precedent, 50 years of privacy, 50 years of Roe versus Wade. Now, to be clear, we know that Roe v. Wade didn't go far enough. Roe v. Wade had been eroded in many places, in many spaces. We had a crisis of access during that time. where even though individuals may have had a right on paper, they didn't have a right in person. As we stand here, we are just a few minutes away from your nearest abortion clinic, the Surgical Center at Bedford Heights, the place where I pastor, Chillicothe, Ohio, at Orchard Hill United Church of Christ. We are an hour and a half away from our nearest surgical center. Our second nearest surgical center is 2.5 hours away. People ask, why this amendment? Why now? I'll tell you, it has been brewing for a long, long while, because people in this state, in many different places, have lacked access long before the Dobbs decision was decided on June 24th of 2022. But let me tell you what happened on June 24th, 2022. We in this state immediately had the imposition of a 6-week abortion ban, a near total ban on abortion access, banning abortion before many individuals even know that they're pregnant. We had 82 days of that ban being in effect, 82 days of that ban on our people, and we saw the cost. Reverend Brian alluded to this earlier, the pain and the suffering that individuals had to endure because of economic insecurity, the inability to travel to access abortion, and indeed, the confusion that was placed into our public spaces, into our public hospitals. The lawyers became the main decision makers instead of the doctors and the patients. And it was out of that impetus that a group of physicians in this state came together with preachers and legacy repro organizations and clinics and people all over the repro space and said, now is the time. We need a constitutional amendment to assure that this never happens again in the state of Ohio, to ensure that the values that we as Ohioans hold dear, our religious and moral values, but even more so our democratic values, our values of an open and a free society, are enshrined in our Constitution for good. Out of this comes this issue 1. Issue 1, the Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Amendment that we have before us today, has 5 main elements that it protects as rights. In addition to abortion, protected in this amendment are access to contraception, access to fertility treatment, the ability to continue one's own pregnancy, and the access to miscarriage management. Those items, those elements are not guaranteed in Ohio law, and indeed, for many people in those 82 days, especially last year, that we were under that 6-week abortion ban, they were not available. We in this space stand behind those 5 rights. In addition to those 5 rights, the element of abortion always has hinged around this conversation about viability and prohibitions. Now, the people who are standing on the street corner out here, our opposition, I call them the people across the street, because we always have the people across the street no matter where we are. The people across the street will try to tell you that this amendment allows abortion anytime, anywhere, all the time. Oh, friends, that is not so. The reality is this amendment explicitly details that abortion can be prohibited by the state after viability, but one important detail that it does also include is that the determination of viability and when a fetus is viable is no longer going to be held in the grips of gerrymandered politicians. No, friends, that definition, that medical question, will be held in the hands of medical doctors making medical decisions with the patients they serve. Doesn't sound too radical to me that doctors should do doctor stuff. Preachers should do preacher stuff. Doctors should do doctor stuff. People in the legislature should not be in that equation. And so as we come to this place, this amendment that has those 5 rights, it has that protection of viability, it centers patients and patient care by centering their doctors. This amendment comes, and now there is opposition. We do not hear the opposition saying, oh, this is a bad amendment because we are against abortion in all cases. We don't hear them say this is a bad amendment because we think contraception should be prohibited. Those are their actual arguments. Those are their actual beliefs. Instead, they have decided to reason from incredulity. They have decided to come and try to sell to you and to me the fear-based regeneration of old tropes. How many individuals here have heard the arguments being made about parental consent? Oh, this will take away parental consent. Do you know that today, if a child desires to have an abortion and not have their parent involved, they can do that right now in the state of Ohio. There's a procedure called judicial bypass that many of us as clergy have been involved with deeply. When a child comes and says, I do not wish to be pregnant and I don't wish to go through my parents to have that permission, they can go in front of a judge through a very particular, very well thought out process and receive that authority today. Nothing changes with the judicial bypass law in the state of Ohio. That is a law that has been, it will be, it's not affected by the amendment. How do I know it's not affected by the amendment? I've read the amendment. And you might think that that's a big bragging statement. I often tell people I've read the Bible from cover to cover. Guess what? The amendment's not nearly as long as the Bible. The amendment's only one page. You can read the amendment too at readtheamendment.com. See how simple that is. Go read the amendment, take a look at exactly what the amendment says, and understand that the rights of parents are not affected by this amendment. The rights of individuals are. The ability for us to protect these rights and to protect these values, it's essential and at the center of our work. Brian mentioned polling a little bit. There hasn't been a lot of public polling done about this particular issue, mainly because there's already been public polling done about the August special election, and it's very confusing to have these pollsters constantly contacting people trying to get that read. The only poll that matters, friends, is already open. That is the poll at the ballot box. November 7th is the last day to vote. I say that because you can go and vote right now. Indeed, you ought to go and vote right now. You ought to get down to your local board of elections, if at all possible, and cast your ballot today in support of reproductive health rights and justice. That is the poll that is going to count. You also, in this space, need to know that how you approach this issue in the future, in the next 24 days, will affect the outcome of that poll at the ballot box. How you talk to your friends and your neighbors, your colleagues, those who sit in pews or in other spaces with you, those individuals need to hear your voice. They need to hear you say, abortion bans are against my religion, and I'm voting yes on issue 1. Now, we have a training that's going to come after this rally. We'd invite you all to stay. My colleague, Nicole Marino from Catholics for Choice, will also be presenting at that. We're going to give you all kinds of great tools and information about how to have these difficult conversations with sometimes difficult people. But as we gather in this space, what we want you to know is that this amendment restores our rights. It restores rights that we have had for decades, and it protects them for decades to come. This amendment, at its heart, pours out of the hearts of physicians, of clergy, of clinic workers, of people who've had abortions, and people who need abortions in the future. It pours out of the hope of our community, and it pours out of our values as Ohioans who believe that every person has a right to determine their own future. Not the church, not the state, but patients must decide their fate. Thank you all so much for being here and for being supporters of not only the right to choose, but the right to access the choice that you make. Thank you, friends.
So I'm a fun facts kind of guy, and one of my favorite fun facts is in the I think starting in the 50s and 60s, every major Protestant denomination was for legalizing abortion. Not necessarily enthusiastically, let's be honest, but they were all for legalizing abortion. The Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Methodists, these are not radical people. They were all for legalizing it, as, of course, was the UCC, the Disciples of Christ, many others, because they were tired of back alley abortions killing women. They were tired of living in a country where health care was determined by the state and not by doctors. And it should be noted, there has always been Catholic dissent welcoming a pro-choice position, and I'm going to invite Nicole up to give us that perspective.
And this will be a quick introductory perspective, but my name is Nicole Marino, she, her pronouns. I work at Catholics for Choice. I'm the Ohio field organizer. If you've not heard about Catholics for Choice before, it's a DC organization that works to encounter, educate, and embolden pro-choice Catholics. And a lot of people hear pro-choice Catholics or pro-choice Catholicism and think, what are you talking about? We're here to really take a deep dive into that pro-choice Catholicism. And that's what we were able to do when we joined this partnership with Faith Choice Ohio. We're traveling all throughout Ohio really to kind of break down some of those myths and get into good Catholic social teaching and talk about why, because of your Catholic social teaching, you should care and be more interested in abortion access, right? So Catholics for Choice invested in Ohio specifically around issue 1. They wanted someone to really be sure we were seeking out pro-choice Catholics and becoming more involved in this fight specifically. I highly encourage you, if you're able to stay later this afternoon for the Faith and Reproductive Freedom Tour that myself and Reverend Terry helped discuss. If not, please go to our website, catholicsforchoice.org. You can find my information. We also have some amazing pledge cards outside to have more conversation. I would love to have one-on-one discussions about what pro-choice Catholicism looks like and how you're able to get more involved in the Ohio initiatives and other programs afterwards. One thing that Reverend Terry and I love to promote is the Advocates Bible Study. Catholics for Choice last year created about a 100-page book called the Advocates Bible. It goes into historical context of Catholicism, abortion access, and how to be this Catholic advocate. It's wonderful. That Bible study actually starts on October 19th. If you have a discussion today with myself, maybe after this, and want to learn more, I'm more than happy to share that information with you. But this fight for reproductive justice must include Catholics and does include Catholics. 63% of Catholics are pro-choice. 63% of Catholics believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. So we like to call ourselves the silent majority, but we do not want to be silent any longer. So I am here to really bring that voice into these spaces and represent that Catholic voice here. Thank you.
So as part of these rallies, we always like to invite people to share stories. And the first person who's going to come up is actually my wife, Johanna Solomon, and share a story about what went on in our lives in April of this year.
I am far shorter than this thing is. So I want to tell a story, my story, and make a point about what the 6-week bans, what Ohio's current law does to our healthcare system, and the suffering that it can create, not just for people like me, but for the babies that could be born. I came, the tissue box is up here for me. I came to Ohio about 6 years ago after a particularly contentious presidential election that divided our country. You probably remember it. I came because there was a call for peace builders, for mediators, to show up for our communities in the United States, where most of us were focused abroad. I will also note that I have less written down than I normally would, because my focus abroad is the Middle East. So I showed up in Ohio. I showed up to be helpful, to do relational organizing, to educate people, and mostly to have students and people that I meet ask better questions. My job is to have people ask better questions. I work at Kent State. I don't speak for Kent State. but I am a professor in the School of Peace and Conflict Studies. So I literally am here as part of the legacy of May 4th, 1970, to work to bring our communities together. What I didn't know was that I would end up in my own story. 6 months ago, I almost died. Because we made a choice to end a pregnancy as opposed to giving birth to a child that would live for maybe a couple of days in intense suffering and pain and die horribly. And every person I have spoken to, including people who tell me that they are not pro-choice, that they think abortion is evil, when I tell them the story of what would have happened if I did not find access to abortion, they either stare at me because they don't want to admit that they don't believe babies should suffer either, or they say, of course, that's the exception. Of course, your healthcare providers could provide an abortion in that case. And they can't. During this process, I had to ask my healthcare providers if this fetus did not make it, and I had what would have been a late second trimester miscarriage, if they could save my life. And the stunning response for my healthcare providers was, that's such a smart question. People in this state have to ask that because not all providers feel like they can. Because there are many circumstances where a fetus may still have some cardiac activity or brain activity, but is not viable, is not going to make it. And I had to ask. And luckily, I had great providers that said, of course, we will make sure you are okay, including if we need to get you out of state. Sorry. My healthcare providers also spent a lot of time discussing with me that because we have such a threat to even the current healthcare that we have now, the current reproductive rights healthcare, reproductive healthcare that we have now, because of the threat, we lack doctors, nurses, and the technology, the financial investment into our hospitals to provide care for ongoing pregnancies or to detect things that are still within that 20 weeks. So our circumstance came about because if any of you have had children, the 20-week scan is supposed to be joyous, or at minimum, hilarious. It's where you get to see a child's anatomy. Made me oddly uncomfortable because I didn't really focus on their anatomy. But it's supposed to be a scan that tells you that like your kid is going to be okay and they've got all their fingers and toes. In Ohio, you cannot have an abortion after that 20-week scan. But it's the 20-week scan that tells you if the fetus's anatomy is in fact incompatible with life, or at least with life, a decent life after birth. In ours, we found a condition called heterotaxy. We had the worst version of it. I say that in case you want to look it up. The absolute worst version of it where our fetus was missing major organs. There were organs that were on the wrong side, which doesn't really work terribly well. And there was not a complete heart. But there was still a heartbeat, and there would be. There would still be growth. Why? Because a fetus gets their oxygen from the person carrying them, not from their own heart. They're not breathing yet. So a little after 20 weeks, because we don't have as much of the technology here in Ohio, so it took, after a doctor's appointment where they told us that there was a heart condition, which was a total shock. My husband actually got to leave the ultrasound that was taking too long because we thought everything was fine to go pick up other children in our family. But it took almost 7 days after that initial scan to get into a specialist because we don't have enough specialists in fetal medicine because of our laws. And I say this again and again because whether you believe in pro-choice or not, you probably believe in our state having access to fetal medicine, which we aren't getting because of our laws, because doctors do not want to come to our state and risk being prosecuted if they do what is medically right and necessary according to every national and international organization that they are members of. So we didn't find out until after 22 weeks how bad the condition was. An 80% mortality rate before the age of 5, with an almost 100% guarantee of death, horrible death by suffocation in the first 3 days, is not something anyone I have ever met thinks should be endorsed. And I nearly died because we didn't have that technology, even though my doctors here said, yeah, that is a traumatizing thing for anyone. Would create suffering to have this baby for the baby. It would create suffering for the children currently in our home to watch a baby brother die. It would obviously create suffering for me to carry a 3rd trimester with a child that was going to die. Imagine the number of times that you've seen a pregnant woman asked about the gender of their baby or about if they're planning a baby shower. So we made a really difficult choice, but I had to go out of state because we don't have care for that here, even though the doctors agreed, even though this was not going to be a successful pregnancy, a living child. I had to go out of state. And once you hit 23 weeks, it gets dangerous. And I almost died because it was. And if I had had to go to a clinic, I would be dead right now. And that is a reality for us in Ohio. It's also a reality for my living stepchildren. It's also a reality for my foster children. And I bring that up, it's the last thing I'll say, because often this is a counter argument. But you can just send kids into foster care. I stand here as a foster parent. The trauma that my child, who has been through foster care, would have experienced if her second mother had suddenly died is inconceivable. And I can tell you, as the person who gets calls, despite the fact that we tell them we're closed almost every week, and when I was open to more kids every day, asking for children to be placed in my home that are sleeping in the Cuyahoga County building, I can tell you that there is not more capacity in foster care either. So please, for the current kids that live in Ohio, for our medical providers to be able to come and work in Ohio, for us to be able to get better health care, for the human beings with uteruses that Ohio's law endangers, please, please vote. Vote yes. Make sure that we have access to not only reproductive health care, but also to doctors and medical care for all kinds of things that can happen in reproductive health, in pregnancy, that we are lacking because of our laws currently in Ohio. I will end there. Thank you.
Joe's story, our story, is not unique. Is there anyone else who feels moved to share about their experiences? Fair enough. We come now to a time where I invite you all to answer Joe's call, to commit to voting in November, to commit to telling other people to vote in November, and to commit to sharing why they should vote in November. Everyone has a reason they're here today, whether they want to share it publicly or not. And we need to remember why that is. We need to remember that those who want to spread lies, to think the end justifies the means, are bad fruit. Doesn't mean they're bad people, but they got their heads where they shouldn't be. And that people who lie to get their way don't deserve to win. They don't deserve the attention they want. They don't deserve our energy. We are for something. We are for the people of Ohio. We are for children like ours. We are for ending suffering. The people of Ireland, was it just last year, voted by referendum to end Ireland's abortion ban. Why? Because a woman died because the doctor spent more time with the lawyer than the patient. And she wasn't the first. This does not need to happen here. So I encourage you all to vote. I encourage you to tell people to vote. We got cards out there. Red, Wine, and Blue brought them. Faith Choice Ohio brought them. Sorry I didn't give you the shout out. Red, Wine, and Blue is here also. Catholics for Choice is there. Grab a stack of cards. That's what they're there for. Trust me, after November, they're going to be useless anyway. So you might as well grab them now, fill them out, and send them to folks. Mobilizing and organizing so folks aren't scared to speak up, so folks don't get intimidated by nonsense, is what we are here to do. As people of faith, I don't care what the tradition, there's always stories of people standing up for the values they hold dear, and especially standing up for making sure compassion reigns in our society, now and always. So again, I invite you, as our time comes to a close, for those gathered to fill out a card. For those online, feel free to jump onto Faith Choice Ohio's website. They got a bunch of links there. Catholics for Choice, Red, Wine, and Blue. UCC Reproductive Justice also has a bunch of links and material as well. to get involved and to do the exact same thing. Fill up people's inboxes. It's great to get spammed, to get blocked because you challenge someone's opinion. So with that, go from this place, knowing you are called to greatness. You are called to making compassion and love real in our world, and that always we are bound together in compassion and love, and that as long as we work towards that, we know that the long arc of history bends towards justice, and we will win one day. This service is over. Now our service begins.